Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome and many thanks for joining us at the RoSPA 2022 Excellence in Road Safety Conference. This is our third online conference over the last couple of years, and we've decided this year to focus on what is excellence in road safety. I'm David Walker, I'm RoSPA's Head of Road and Leisure Safety, and I'll be chairing today's session. The session today comes in the context of the forthcoming Road Safety Strategic Framework for DFT, in which we expect education to play a central and complementary role in delivering any new improvements to road safety for UK residents and public. Our expert speakers today are going to provide examples of road safety excellence, both in the UK setting and from their experiences internationally. Today we have the WebEx software that we're using, so you can ask questions in the chat box at the bottom. So there's a little chat box. We'll look and we'll keep an eye on them as we work through the day, but we'll tend to try and take the sessions either at the end of the presentation or in summation at the end there. We've got four brilliant speakers today. We've got David Stelling from DFT, Fiona Filan from Brainbox Research and Elizabeth Box from the RSC Foundation. I'm going to move on to David's presentation in a second. David is the, I'm going to move on to David's presentation here. Sorry, I've moved my notes ahead a bit too quickly there. Move on to David's presentation, who is the policy team leader at the Department for Transport. David has worked for DFT since December 2016, recently becoming rail stations and rail accessibility policy lead. He's served in London's Metropolitan Police for 30 years, including time during the Olympic Games. David was the traffic divisional commander for 5.5 years in London as well. David, I'm going to pass over to you for your presentation.
Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed from there. Before I get into the presentation, it would probably be useful just to give a bit of the background to where we are at present in government. So if I was to ask for a show of hands of who's been reading the papers recently, there'd probably all be a big show of hands, because you will have all noticed that we've actually had quite a few changes of government, and this is yes, it's an unusual time that we've had so many changes to government in short a space of time, but it's not an unusual process of governments changing. And traditionally, the civil service offers guidance to ministers. Ministers then consider the guidance, and then ministers approve the guidance or set some new directions for which the civil service will need to respond to. A lot of that will depend, obviously, what's in manifestos that governments have been elected on. So even though we have a government of the same party, it is still a new government. So what we will have to do is present previous work that we are seeking ministerial guidance and approval for to the new ministers. So that has meant that we are waiting for confirmation of direction from the new team of ministers. So what I'm going to be speaking about today is a broad direction of travels that officials have been working on for a considerable period, that we are just waiting for ministerial agreement or ministerial changes to the direction of travel. A lot of it, when I actually come onto the slides, you will see is things that we know, things that we have all been working on. You know, it's the great expression is motherhood and apple pie. There's some universal truths out there, but all of these things need to be put in to the context of where we are politically. Also, in terms of legislation, it sort of does help people to have an understanding of how legislation is passed. Normally, you will have a party that gets elected to power with manifesto commitments. The civil service will work on those manifesto commitments, and then the public will, in many cases, be asked in a form of consultation process what they think about the proposals. What will then happen is the government gives a response to the consultation, and then based on that, the government will propose if I can say, a legislative framework or a legislative outcome. Now that will then require parliamentary time, and that will have to be balanced with what other commitments, what other matters are actually going on at the present time. Now, perhaps COVID is a good example, whereas if there is an emergency, governments can pass legislation very, very quickly, very, very speedily, but it's still subject to parliamentary scrutiny. So normally it would probably take between about 2 and 4 years for a matter to get sort of through Parliament on what we call primary legislation, which is the main enabling acts and powers. There is something else called statutory instruments or secondary legislation, which is still subject to parliamentary scrutiny. And you know, just to give an example, the Highway Code is brought in under statutory instrument, but is still subject to parliamentary scrutiny and has to be signed off formally by a committee within Parliament. So, for example, if we look at the recent Highway Code changes, we could not, as civil servants and government, say until the day it was actually signed off that those matters are now law, because they could have been subject to change or subject to veto at the last minute. And what we would normally do, as was the case with Highway Code changes, is publish material with a series of caveats to say this is what the government is proposing. And you will have seen lots of articles in the paper, no doubt, and lots of illustrations, the changes to priorities and other things as an illustration of what was coming in. But until the day the law is passed, we cannot say definitely that is what's going to come in. So once it is in, as we have done with the Think campaign, then we have been able to do a lot of media comms, and we have a whole series of other comms coming in on the Highway Code later on during the year. But that sort of just gives you a little bit of a background of where we are at the current time. So if my top assistant can then move us on to the next slide, we can sort of put this into a little bit more of a background. And as you will see from there, the awful thing is we are still seeing just over 4 people lose their life on the roads every day. And if you actually have a look at the graph there in front of you, it's been fairly static since about 2010. Yes, there are ups and downs. Yes, we've seen a slight decrease during the COVID because there was less traffic on the road. Yes, it has gone up a bit, but it is not the same rise it was before. But from a personal perspective and from an officials and from a government perspective, we understand that every one of those figures is an individual, is a family, is part of a community, and people will be deeply touched by all of those. We are dealing with people at the end of the day. If you have a look at the figures, again, it's something that you all probably know only too well. It's about £30 billion a year is the cost to the UK economy. The figures would probably be around about 2.25 million for the economic cost of each road death. And that's for loss of earnings, the cost of treatment, and a lot of other effects from there. Plus also, yes, again, as officials, we are aware of the trauma that will actually go beyond that as well. We also need to think about the future. I mean, you just have to sort of, either read the papers or walk down the roads. We've got electric cars. We can see e-scooters. We can see e-bikes. We can see different modes of transport being brought in with experiments, such as autonomous vehicles. And what we need to do is to think about how we can future-proof the legislation to ensure that any new forms of transport are brought in. They are brought in safely. They're brought in a way that we can ensure road safety messages are passed, and everything that can be possibly done to make them as safe as possible will actually occur. And a lot of this has to be brought in and counterbalanced against a lot of the economic benefits, plus also green benefits and zero carbon benefits that a lot of these new transport modes offer us. And again, if we look at the national picture, road safety is one of the elements that actually has been devolved to the devolved administrations, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And there is some absolutely incredible work that is being done in England and Wales through the National Police Chiefs Council, through England, through the local authorities. And of course, there is some great stuff that is being done in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales as well. So there is a huge amount of learning that we can all draw on from there. If you could then move on to the next slide, please. Probably the writing is not great. Hopefully it's big enough for everyone to see. I won't be you'll be pleased to hear, speaking and reading it out, but it's something that a lot of you may be aware of is the SAFE system. We've moved away from the old 3 E's of engineering, enforcement, and education, training, and publicity, to looking at things in a systematic way. And it is a SAFE systems approach, which actually has a look at all of the key things that actually can have an impact on road safety. Now, my own particular responsibility that I have in addition to working on the Roads Policing Liaison Team and Road Safety Division, I also have responsibility for drink and drug driving, or D3, as we use that. And I have a practitioners group that looks on it as a system, that you've got to think about, each individual bit of the system, be it the education, drinks companies limiting the messages to say, look, don't drink and drive, think campaign, don't drink and drive, mates saying to their mates, do not drink and drive, to the enforcement side, to the court side, and then to an ongoing education side. And it's exactly the same with road safety. And one of the key foundations that we see in road safety, that you can see under the enablers, is the education and communication bit. Now, the role of DFT in all of this is very much a coordinating mind, because you have the devolved administrations with their own responsibilities, and they're doing some fantastic stuff. What we can do as a department is look to bring everyone together, which is what we're seeking to do, so that we can share ideas, we can share good practice, and also that we can do a bit of a stock take of where are we at the moment, what needs to be done to take us forward, what more can we do to make everyone safer out on the roads for whatever transport mode that you're actually doing it. So part of it is to try and work out, what is going to be truly effective. And again, there is some brilliant work that Liz will be talking about, that a lot of people here that deal day in, day out, a lot of the evaluations, the behavioral change side, how can we get the best practice in to help us all collectively get the best value that we can do out of the training, and make sure everyone is aware of what's happening and occurring from there. So we look on the Road Safety Education Forum that we've set up earlier this year, which brings everyone together. And if there are people listening to this webinar today that haven't had an invite, one, please accept my apologies for that. It is not a deliberate oversight. It's just trying to reach as many people as possible. Please approach the organisers with an email and then say, look, you'd be interested in coming along, because only by doing this together are we going to be able to get the best product and be most effective. The other key thing that we really want to do and have a look at is to try and embed lifelong learning. And again, you know, you will have seen my previous service in the police is actually looking at, from the earliest age, just to try and get people as safe as possible. We used to have a lot of police officers in schools. We still do so, but it's working with everyone else to get those messages across at each stage of somebody's both life and lifelong experiences to learning, and then also as a parent, as a friend, as a carer, as an uncle, as an aunt, just to be able to pass on those messages from there. And it's not just so much the messages being able to go to a think campaign and say, look, here is some great stuff that's been designed, or go to RoSPA, or go to the RIC Foundation or the AA, some of the stuff they do. It's about the attitudes that we exhibit, because, you know, a lot of behavioral change as well is the result of people's attitudes manifesting themselves in their actions. It's a cultural thing. If you are as a young kid in a car with a parent who's consistently swearing at motorists, driving aggressively, inevitably that type of behavior will rub off on you because it's accepted. How can we encourage everyone to think, you know, even subconsciously, how you drive is educating the people in the back of the car? Now, we know in terms of road dynamics, most cities and areas will have a driving culture. You know, you can sort of see the paraphrases of, you know, in big cities, everyone drives aggressively, everyone drives really, really quickly. Not always the case, but you will actually see that because it is a culture. People will actually respond to that. So if we can get people to drive, cycle, and walk in a more measured factor that takes into account their own safety and everyone else's safety, then overall we're going to get a more safe environment from there. So we all have a part to play in education, in road safety, and you know that is some of the messages that we need to get across. It isn't just an intervention that you see online in a class or everywhere else. It's every day we all can contribute to that. And again, you know, I think we need to also think about what can we do to ensure that we're actually teaching the right things. And I think we need to look at how can we ensure that we have a robust system of evaluation, where we look at something to work out how effective it is. Are we teaching something in the right way? Are we able to have a product that has been evaluated not only by peers but by other professionals that is very effective? Can we then share that with somebody else to say, look, to save you going to the expense of creating this, this is something that we have got, which is proven, it has been evaluated, it's in keeping with all the best principles, please take it. And you know, from our perspective in DFT, I often see that through the Think campaign that we get requests. I had one from a local authority who wished to use an old, but it was only a couple of years old, and still really, really valid, Think campaign on drug driving as an infiller on local radio. And I thought, how brilliant. We've got the stuff. The government's paid for it. It's evaluated. It works. Please take it. And there is so many organizations out there that are doing exactly the same thing with the products that they have produced. What we need to do is make sure that we all periodically have a look at them. Perhaps we may need to update them because, you know, understanding of what really is effective will change over time. So the key thing is to ensure that we do the best we can do, share. Don't be afraid to say, look, these people are doing it better than me. And I just look at the members of the Road Safety Education Forum, and we've got some absolute giants of knowledge and road safety there. And we're just so happy that they want to get involved and actually to help us reduce the number of people that are killed and seriously injured on the roads each day. Yes, you've got other big elements of the safe system as well, which are equally as important. Yes, we need to look at the laws. Yes, we need to work at for the police with enforcement. But, you know, enforcement doesn't necessarily mean a trip to court. It may be words of advice at the side of the road. It may be a recognized rehabilitation scheme, such as speed awareness or some of the other courses from there. And it is about getting people to learn so that they can actually pass messages on. And if we just look at, you know, one thing, certainly from a policing perspective, which is known as the halo effect, is that there's been a lot of academic research that would show that if I can call it a traffic intervention or a traffic stop at the side of the road, can actually have an effect on speed up to 45 minutes after that has happened, which comes back to a little bit of what I was saying. The culture on the roads, people tend to respond to what's around them. So there is some great stuff that's being done out there. Practically, there's some great stuff that's being done out there on traditional education wise, and we just want to work with people as much as we possibly can do so that we all collectively can succeed. David.
Brilliant, David. Thank you very much for that. I've found my glasses now as well, so I can actually read my notes for the rest of the session. There is a couple of questions in the chat, but I think what we'll do is we'll come back to them at the end of the presentation. There's a question about an update to legislation in a specific piece of legislation, and then there was some really positive comments about the safe systems approach and the apply there. One point that I would one note that I would point out to the delegates is that we've dropped the events at RoSPA email address into the chat. So again, if you're interested in the Road Safety Education Forum, which David mentioned, drop us a note and we'll make sure that David's got that as soon as possible. Right, fantastic. Okay, so we're now going to move to our next speaker, who is Elizabeth Fox. Elizabeth is the Research Director at the RAC Foundation, which is a transport policy and research organisation that explores the economic, mobility, safety and environmental issues related to roads and other users in the UK. Elizabeth sits on a wide variety of government and industry expert panels, including the Road Safety Education Forum, and is actively involved in a national level research and policy development. Elizabeth is a transport planner by training, an accomplished research programme and trials manager who's currently conducting doctoral research at Cranfield University. I've been interested to see what that subject is on, Elizabeth, but we'll not segue there today. And this is where she's specialising in developing and trialling theoretically based road safety interventions. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Thanks very much for that introduction, David. I realise now, with somebody driving my slides, I actually end up with quite a bit of animation in them. So what I might end up doing is sharing my own, if that would work okay, because otherwise I think, Kate, you'll probably be fed up with me by the end of it. So let me just share my screen and hopefully this will work okay. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yes, I can, Elizabeth, so that looks great.
Perfect, wonderful. Okay, well, thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak at this session today. Oh, sorry, just getting used to a different sharing software package. Let me go back again. So today I'm going to be talking to you about developing and evaluating evidence-based road safety interventions. As David says, I'm the research director at the RoSPA Foundation. I'm also a doctoral researcher at Cranfield University, and I'm going to be talking to you today about those kind of active ingredients that we need to all be thinking about including in the design and evaluation of our road safety interventions. I'm also going to be using some sort of worked examples through my own work as well. So today in particular, this is what we're going to be going over in the next, I think we've got about 15 to 20 minutes or so to go through it. So firstly, I'm going to be talking about the real vital importance of building on the work of others, not starting from scratch and seeing where we can build on. Then looking at specifying the aims and objectives of part of your work. How do you set your intervention up for the best chance of success? How to define your logic model and how that relates to what you end up doing as part of your intervention, and how you could be using behaviour change techniques and other existing practitioner guides about how to deliver good intervention design. And finally, talking a little bit about evaluating interventions using self-report surveys. And then I'll finish with some concluding remarks. Excuse me one moment, I'm just going to try and move. I can see, perfect, I can see more of my screen now, wonderful. Okay, so I would hope by the end of the session today, hopefully you'll have a few hints, tips and ideas of things to take away, things to go away and read about, and hopefully it will bring up some useful points that you can take into your own areas of work. Okay, so starting on the building on the work of others. So it's really vitally important we don't start from scratch when we deliver interventions. We're not often, very rarely, the first people to ever thought about trying to tackle a particular issue, particularly in road safety. We've had some very sticky issues that have been around for a long time. So one of the really important things it is to do when you first start is think about, well, what have other people learned about this? What's worked, what hasn't, where do I go from here? So for this presentation today, I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll put in a couple of search terms into Scopus, which is a abstracts and citation database. And I put in, I think it was road safety and pre-driver education, an area that I'm particularly interested in. And 16 existing reports came up, articles. I've put a selection of those up on the screen. As you see, Fiona's probably going to feature quite highly within this whole section, I imagine. I know is speaking later as well. But so there's lots of existing work out there in which we need to build on. And one of the really good things to do if you're looking at existing work and thinking, oh gosh, there's a huge amount out there, how do I filter through it? How do I realise what's important and what's not? Really good to try and look for a critical review or a systematic review in the subject area you're interested in. So as you can see, there's a Casarano and Murphy report there, which was a critical review looking at how do we reduce young driver crash risk over 10 years. That thus for interest, the kind of key finding from that actually was, and this is something that David brought up in his talk, was the social connections were really, really important. And that was one of those things that if we can encourage a safer social environment for young people, we'd be doing a lot. And obviously, it's really hard to guess at that. And it's probably, we tend to focus on individuals at the moment rather than their social connections. So that's something to focus on. The other thing was around what's called cognitive skills. So this often refers to things like your visual scanning, your hazard perception awareness, and doing a lot more on those to bring those skills up to speed. So out of their whole review, they said these were the two areas that had the greatest potential for impact. And that's great, isn't it? Because when we start to understand, well, where can we best put our efforts into, it's really good to know what particular issues we could be focusing on. You also see on the screen that there's a connected papers demonstration, if you like, and as you can see in the middle there's the Casarano report, and what it essentially does, it allows you to put in articles and it shows you a whole web of other articles that are related to it. So it really starts to help you understand, what should I be looking at, who else has been doing work in this area. So you can actually get quite a long way before even leaving your desk, and I'd really recommend you do that if you can. Many of you probably thinking, I don't work in a university, I don't have access to all these articles. I mean, there are ways in which you can get access to good quality research and articles, even if you don't have access. Increasingly, we're living in an open research world. I've got an example right at the top of the screen there of core.ac.uk. Increasingly, you've got more and more articles on that sort of database. Google Scholar can get you quite a long way. And if in doubt, you can always contact authors. Often they're very happy to be able to share those with practitioners if they're able to, because they know that you're the ones that are trying to deliver something that can have an impact on the ground, and they're often quite happy for their work to be used to inform that. So don't be afraid to get in touch with people. They're often quite happy to hear from you. Okay, so once you've worked out what the background information is, how do you specify your aims and objectives? And I really love Bloom's taxonomy, and I recommend it wherever I go, because I think it's a really great structure to help us think about how are we actually going to very neatly specify what we want to achieve. Anybody on the call that's in the education space will recognise Bloom's taxonomy. It's highly used for thinking about every lesson in the school will have its outputs and outcomes that you want to achieve in that lesson, and it very much helps you kind of frame that in a very practical way. So, for instance, your aim might be to evaluate the effectiveness of a certain intervention. You might want to look at improving self-reported road safety attitudes immediately after it's delivered. So that might be the focus of your particular inquiry or study. An objective might be to design and pilot an intervention and deliver it within a certain time frame. So it can kind of help you with really specifying that. And what I'd say is, when you're looking at designing interventions, really try and avoid general terms like investigate or establish. We all know what SMART objectives are. They're being specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound, and really being very clear about what you are and are not going to do as part of your interventions. Often I think we try and boil the ocean and trying to do everything within one intervention. It's much better to be very specific and focus on a area which you have good grounds to be able to deliver change on. So next stage, in terms of what's the background, what aims and objectives do I have, is actually a really good way to set your intervention up for success is making sure you're using a behavioural model if you're thinking about behaviour change interventions. There's a huge number of behaviour change interventions out there, absolutely loads. So what I thought I'd do today is just focus on two very well used behaviour change interventions or models, if you like, within the transport and psychology space. And the first is the theory of planned behaviour, and that helps us with understanding kind of how human psychology works through that model. So if we look at what we've got on the screen here, you in the end you want to influence behaviours, and how the model is conceptualized to understand how we influence behaviors is saying, well, actually our intentions feed into our behaviors. So we need to look at how can we influence intentions, and then there's other things that influence our intentions. So our attitudes towards a behavior, and the subjective norms, which is essentially what other important people to that individual think, or what they think sometimes, and also the perceived behavioral controls. So how much actual control people feel they have about actually changing their behaviours. You could think about other areas of activity where somebody might really want to get a full exercise regime in place, but actually when it comes down to it, they don't feel that they actually have the control or ability to be able to get out there and put that into practice. And so those are your kind of your key points into intention. But what then is important is understanding what sort of lies behind those, and that's where you have that second level of behavioural beliefs. So just to show you how this works in practice, just taking an example from a paper from Elliott and Armitage, and they were looking at promoting driver compliance with speed limits. And what they found was that as part of their work was that they tried to elicit these behavioural beliefs to what was influencing attitudes. And they found that people didn't have very safe behavioural beliefs around keeping to the speed limits. They specifically designed an intervention where they wanted people to have these, essentially promote these behavioural beliefs. So they wanted people to understand that keeping to 30-mile-an-hour speed limit will reduce their risk of being involved in a collision or injury with pedestrians and make it easier to detect hazards. They wanted to encourage them to think that keeping to the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit would make it not difficult to keep up with traffic. There was that concern that, well, I'm not going to be keeping up with traffic if I'm driving, within the speed limit. And keeping to 30-mile-an-hour limits would make you feel more relaxed and use less fuel. So those were the sort of behavioural beliefs they were trying to promote as part of that work. And then they measured the outcome of it. So they wanted to understand for somebody to keep within the 30-mile speed limit over the next month and what their thoughts were on it. And as you can see, the options that people had, was like a scale, so bad and good being at each end of the 7-point scale. And this is a consistently used attitudinal measurement for the theory of planned behaviour. But you can see there how they've used the model to structure what they're trying to influence and then what they're trying to measure to understand whether their intervention was effective or not. Another model that's very well used at the moment, and I think is very practical, which is why I wanted to bring it up here, is COM-B. So this essentially takes, I think it's 18 different behavioural models into this one model. It then leads you on to 9 different intervention functions and 7 different policy categories. So as I said, it's a very sort of practical approach. If you have a look at that link at the bottom of the screen, that would take you through to the full document. It's actually not a huge amount to purchase and use, but it's a very workable document to go through. And essentially, this is based on the concept that our behaviour is influenced by 3 particular issues. So our capabilities to do something. So the physical capability to perform a behaviour or the psychological capability to perform a behaviour. In terms of our motivation, this could be automatic motivations or reflexive motivations as well. And then opportunities were much more around sort of physical opportunities to do something as well as social opportunities. So if we take an example in road safety, we might say we want to reduce the propensity of young drivers to engage in risky driving practices from driving too fast, for instance. So in terms of capabilities, they've probably got the physical capabilities to drive within the speed limit, but it could be much more about trying to read the road and adjust to driving conditions. And in terms of motivation, it could be about planning to drive within the speed limit and helping them to do that, as well as helping them manage their impulses to speed. And in terms of opportunity, as well as providing opportunity, it could also be about restricting opportunity to drive recklessly by speed limiters, speed humps, etc. And also to try and make things socially unacceptable, to kind of put that social pressure. So I'm not saying any of these are the answer to encouraging or discouraging speeding, but it's just a work through example of how you can use the COM-B model to think through what your options are. And as I said, have a look at the full report, because it takes you through a very step-by-step process in which you can kind of start really developing and brainstorming ideas about what you can address, then think about how acceptable or promising each of them are, and then links that through to behaviour change techniques as well. So once you've got your behavioural model in place, you want to define your logic model. So this is, we don't do this a huge amount in transport sometimes, but it's very commonly used in public health, particularly in medicine. I don't think you get anything published without saying what your logic model is for any intervention that you were delivering. And essentially, this is about what you expect how you expect your intervention to work and what outcomes you're looking to achieve. So I'm taking an example here from the DriveFit program, which I've been developing as part of my PhD research. And here we look at having inputs, which was an input of a film and a workshop to a 16 to 18-year-old student audience. The immediate impact is actually just the delivery of a program. That's kind of your immediate impact, is they've received something. In terms of short-term impacts, what I was looking to do with this was result in changes to student attitudes, subjective norms, and what it takes to be a good driver, and the development of students' self-efficacy skills, which is another word essentially for perceived behavioural control. So you can see those short-term impacts there. What I was trying to do was try and influence those preceding issues that then go on to influence intentions. And then the behavioural impacts will result in safer passenger and driver intentions and behaviours, and then ultimately wanting to lead on to reducing deaths and serious injuries. Now, importantly, you can see there's a dotted line and a greyed out box for health outcomes. So for this particular study, I was looking at pre-drivers. It was out of scope to do any evaluation of, say, telematics data to see how that went to then inform their actual driving behaviours. Obviously, those sorts of studies are the best sorts of studies if you can actually get survey data as well as some real world data. But sometimes we're limited with what we can do, or we're not in that world that we can actually do those evaluations, if you like. So essentially, this is when it's really important to have a behavioural model, because there is still good grounds to focus on attitudes and intentions here, because we have good grounds from behavioural psychology to understand that actually those sorts of things, they don't directly lead to behaviours, but they do influence behaviours in the long run. So you don't need to say this is reduced casualties by this, which we know is so difficult to do in education because it's such a long way down the chain of causation, but you could have actually got a good rationale for why you're doing what you're doing. And as I said, it's really important to make use of behaviour change techniques. So the definition of them is that they're observable, replicable, irreducible components of an intervention which has been designed to alter or redirect causal processes that regulate behaviour. And you can get access to the 93 item taxonomy, which is the latest version. It used to be 26, it's now 93, but the whole point is that they're supposed to be irreducible components. And actually you can see things there like goals and planning, and about how you can do action planning, demonstrations of behaviour. And those are found to be really influential in terms of influencing the outcome of your intervention. And luckily for us, a lot of work has been done to try and make this a little bit more readily understandable to practitioners who are not so in depth with the behavioural psychology field. The two reports at the front, the ones that we've commissioned at the RAC Foundation back in 2017 now, so getting on to be a 5-year anniversary of these reports, but I can tell you they are still very useful documents for people to access and use, and I'm very keen that people coming into the sector are aware that they're there, because essentially the work by Mark Solman looked at the whole area of public health literature, particularly around youth improvements through behavioural outcomes. And what he did was really identify the effective behaviour change techniques for different audiences, which was a massive piece of work. And it is really important to have an understanding of, if this is my target audience and I've got a limited budget and limited time, what's the best way to target my approach? And Fiona's work was very much, as it says there, developing a guidance note for the road safety community, not only on how to use behaviour change techniques, but actually how to think through intervention design as well. So really recommend having a look at both of those, freely available on the RAC Foundation website. I've already mentioned the behaviour change wheel, a really excellent kind of how-to guide of applying that particular approach. And the Learn manual for developing traffic safety education from ETSC is also a great resource in terms of thinking how you're going to design interventions and making sure you've got the evidential and background to do so. So I've just spoken in general terms about designing interventions. The last part of my talk, I was going to focus on the work that I've been doing and kind of bring some of that to life, hopefully, for you in terms of what's involved with intervention design and a bit of the background. So this particular project, the Pre-Driver Theatre and Workshop Education Research, has been funded by the bodies that you can see on the screen. It's been running since September 2019, and final results will be coming out in spring 2023. And this has involved a number of different stages, as you can see. So very much to start with, what I was doing was going out and speaking to the people that were delivering, and doing some intervention surveys as well to understand what sorts of effects these interventions were having. I also did some content analysis of existing performances. So you might be aware that quite a lot of pre-driver theatre work, well, not workshop, but pre-driver theatre work is often testimonial in its nature. This tends to be negatively framed. It will have emergency service personnel talking about their experiences being involved with the aftermath of collisions, and then family members and bereaved family members and victims as well, talking about the consequences of bad behaviours often, but also just inexperience or mistakes that people make, and the impacts that has on them. So that was analysed for the content and looked at BCTs within that. An extensive literature review was conducted, particularly focusing on resilience education and youth development approaches, because what I've wanted to do as part of the research is take our existing practice of negatively framed, emotionally charged interventions, if you like, and compare them to something that's different. So something that's much more focused around coping mechanisms and strategies and how people can manage their behaviours rather than the consequences. So the literature review informed that, then went into intervention design and piloting. and then trial delivery and analysis, which is what I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about today. So I've already talked a little bit about theoretical underpinning. Theory of planned behaviour was the theoretical underpinning for this work. I was using the 93 item taxonomy, using high potential BCTs, which have been identified in previous research. The other evidence-based approach that I wanted to use was implementation intentions, which have got a really good evidence base in the public health literature space, because what if then plans help people to do is to work out situations that they're going to be struggling with, and then work out, well, actually, how am I going to deal with this when I face it? And what's been found in existing research is it really helps embed those plans within the memory system, because you've already thought through the consequences and what you're actually going to do about it in a very negative, well, in a very sort of neutral environment before things get hot and emotional, particularly for young people in the moment. So the example on the screen there is one that we're very familiar with, but is very relevant and important. It's, if I have been driving for 2 hours, then I need to take at least a 20-minute break. And actually, I think all of us very well know that one. It's been very well publicised, and it's actually in lots of people's memory banks as a result. The focused conversation method, or the ORID framework, was used to design the workshop that was delivered after the 40-minute film that was put together for DriveFit. And this is a framework that's very much used in the professional facilitation world. I'd really recommend people have a look up on it if you're looking at delivering conversational environments where you're looking to achieve outcomes, because essentially what this does is it helps people identify issues, it helps them work through their feelings about how they feel about those situations, and it helps them interpret that for them, and then helps them come out with a final action plan of what they're actually going to do as a result. So on the screen is some screenshots from the DriveFit intervention that was developed. This was a 40-minute talk show style format film, where of course we talked about difficulties and issues that young people might face, but very quickly the focus was on what you can do about it, providing rules of thumb in terms of particularly things like learning to drive and the experience you need to get, and really trying to have those health promoting behaviours talked about. The QR code on the screen should take you to a short clip of the DriveFit film, which you can watch at your leisure if you'd like to. I never tend to show films in presentations because you never quite know if they're going to work, but that's there if you'd like to have a look at that in some more detail. The workshop that followed, it was followed within 2 weeks of the intervention. And as you can see here, we use the Mentimeter tool. I think that's become quite a popular tool now in quite a lot of online delivered sessions as well as in person. And if you've had experience of it or something similar, you know it's great because it enables interactive participation from the audience, polls and discussions, etc. And given we were delivering this in 2021, which was still very much COVID times and it was virtual, it was really good to have that sort of interactive element with the students. And it also involved quite a lot of group level discussions, because what we wanted to do here was have some sort of active learning. We didn't want them to be passively just watching something and that be it. We wanted them to actually decide what they wanted to take away from that. As you can see, there's another a couple of QR codes on the screen. One takes you to the website, which has got some further clips of the film on it, if you'd like to go and have a look at that. And that was essentially provided to the students as a follow-up material. Interestingly, talking about social connections, there was a real big push with the schools to try and pass this on to parents. They were very, very reluctant to do so, which was a real shame, because there was a missed opportunity, if you like, to be able to get some of this factual information and coping mechanisms and techniques, which is often very relevant to the parents, especially when you're thinking about private practice, when you're learning to drive, how many hours you need to get a week before looking to even take your test, what experience, etc. And then the QR code in the middle of the screen, that essentially takes you to the guide for developing safe driving plans, which was given to the students as part of the workshop, because at the end of the session, we wanted them to take away a postcard that had their plans on it. So they had something physical to take away, that they committed that if this happens, then I'm going to be doing this. And they could be related to mobile phone use or speeding or any of the kind of risk behaviours or things that were discussed within the session. So the intervention itself was evaluated using cluster randomized control trial. This is a very high quality level of design, because you're really very much not just looking at convenient samples, you're actually randomizing this fully, so it can give you quite reliable results. And as you can see, the data was collected at baseline from 32 different schools in Devon and Somerset. We ended up with 24 schools and colleges that took part. 12 were randomized into the intervention and control groups. Control groups just ran the survey work. The intervention groups had the intervention, the facilitated workshop, and then a data collection immediately afterwards, and then 8 to 10 weeks afterwards as well. As you can see, another link on the screen is to the ISR-CTM. This is a clinical trials registry. The trial was registered at this website as well. And I think the more we can do this, the better, because it provides real good transparency about what you are testing, what you're not testing. And obviously in medicine, I mean, they have to do this before they get funding to do anything, because they need to be very clear about what effects they're looking for in a particular drug, just so that it's transparent about what you're looking for. So yeah, big thanks to the delivery team who are on the screen, who were absolutely instrumental in being able to both help the delivery of the workshops, but also gaining access and continuing the support of the schools in our delivery of that. So in terms of evaluating interventions, I've already said I was evaluating this using self-report surveys. As I said, it's not your number one option. It's not ideal. You ideally want some sort of real world data as well if you can get it, but sometimes it's all you have in those circumstances, depending on your target group or where you're working. So what I would say is, if you're going to be using self-report surveys, you really need to use validated survey instruments. Try not to make up your own. If you do make up your own, what you really need to do is have multiple survey items, which you can then combine to make a more reliable measure of the construct you're interested in. So for instance, if you're looking at attitudes, you wouldn't just ask one attitude question, you'd ask multiple, and then you'd combine them together if the statistics allowed you to do so, because they were consistent within themselves, and then you'd be using that because it's a much more reliable measure. If you're doing your own, you need to test it with 100 people before running it. So it's quite an intensive process if you're going to test your own. And if you're running your own and trying to measure some of these behavioural concepts, it's really, really hard to do. Just some example questions of what you can use if you're trying to get behind people's intentions, asking about their willingness or likelihood to do something. Those are sort of validated survey questions that are a really good way of getting to that. And as you've already seen, there's some questions around attitudes where you kind of put the diametrically opposing options available for people, and then you kind of combine them together at the end. So what I'm talking about here is measuring the outcomes behaviourally. Often in road safety interventions, we measure whether people like something or not, or whether they thought it was beneficial, often what we call happy sheets. Now, I know these get a bit of a bad rap. Firstly, I'd say I think they're important as well, because it's really important to understand whether people like something. It's very hard ethically to deliver something if people are not engaging with it or they don't like it. It's part of your understanding of the face validity of what you're delivering. But obviously it can't be that on its own. You need to understand the face validity, whether they like it or not, or whether they think it's beneficial, as well as, is it actually having the effect you like? Because often what we find is people really like something and actually it doesn't have any effect at all. So we've got to be very clear about what we're using and why we're using it. Okay, so some concluding remarks just about intervention design. So what I would say is, designing robust and effective educational interventions, it takes time, it takes perseverance, and it takes collaboration amongst all of those with different expertise. You know, the program that I've run over the last few years, I've had so many different people that have been involved and helped. I've done all the research, design and evaluation, and but in terms of the delivery and their routes into school and their expertise in developing films, all of those sorts of things, you need to bring the right people together. I'd say it's all about the planning and preparation. You know, don't scrimp on this part. It's absolutely crucial. You can have a lovely designed intervention at the end, but if you haven't got the background about why you're doing it and how you think it's going to affect behaviours, it's really going to be very difficult to justify what you've done. And also, don't assume programme effectiveness. Test, redesign is an important part of the process, and it's integral as part of programme delivery. We shouldn't just accept an intervention as done and dusted, and that's what we do. We need to constantly look at what can we do to improve it and change it and measure that. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that's been helpful. My contact details are on the screen. I don't know whether there's time for questions now or if you want to do that at the end. But yes, I hope that's been helpful, bit of information about how you can design interventions. I'll be speaking at the National Road Safety Conference next week about the results of this particular piece of research. So if any of you are there, you'll hear the second part of this presentation then. Okay, thank you very much.
Brilliant, Elizabeth. That's absolutely fantastic, and I will look forward to seeing you next week. We've put the links to some of the documents that you mentioned before into the chat, and obviously this whole presentation will be available again to the delegates as it's recorded. Elizabeth, just before you go, I just wanted to pick up on the point that you made this morning about the practitioners. The practitioners say, well, actually, and linking to your happy sheet about saying, I'm here, but I want to get there. Just wanted to touch upon that point there about how somebody can maybe not feel overwhelmed or actually see a clear route there. Did you just want to touch upon that just as the starting point? Because I think you said something this morning which really resonated with me, was we need to recognize that we need to evaluate this, but actually we need to also not build this up into this huge thing that is quite scary for practitioners as well. Is there anything there that you want to comment on?
Yeah, I fully appreciate where, people, well, like probably all of us on the call that are researchers, kind of want us to be as a sector is a hell of a long way away from where we are at the moment. And also, I think one of the points I made on our separate call this morning was that we shouldn't think we're unique in this. The rest of the world are also experiencing the same issues that we are. It's not that we're lagging behind. It's not that we've not got ourselves sorted. This is really hard to do. And actually some international advice now is almost leave education completely. We don't know what's effective and what's not. You better just focus on engineering. In some countries, low middle income countries, maybe that makes sense to focus your money that you have on the road network or whatever. But given that we have this route of access into schools, for me, it's much more about how can we ensure that road safety education can support the overall road safety system. It can't deliver reductions on its own in deaths and serious injuries. It can be much more about making sure possibly that people understand why rules and regulations are in place and kind of legitimize those. So there's lots of different roles for education. And I think the key point is practitioners can't possibly do this on their own. It's too big a task. We need at a national level for there to be much more guidance and support, because it's absolutely impossible for anybody without the background and training to be able to do this. I think sorts of things we need are sort of databases that let people know what others are doing. So maybe that they can have best practice examples that they can apply in their own settings. Maybe we need a kind of a database of kind of good practice survey instruments that people can use. It would be absolutely crazy to ask everybody to go off and do them themselves. They need much more support. So I think my ask is much more at the national level than it is at the local level at this stage, because I think people are making the best use of their time resources as they can and want to do the best that they possibly can. And it's very time intensive and time consuming to get that right.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. And again, we really wanted to showcase and platform what a gold platinum approach to this looks like as well. Okay, fantastic, Elizabeth. I'm sure that there are some conversations and some questions for you in the chat, which we'll come back to at the end of the session again. Okay, so Elizabeth Box from the RIC Foundation, thank you very much. Okay, right, on to our next speaker. Hello, Fenna. So it's Fenna Bolkamp. Fenna is a behavioural scientist at SOMO, where she applies cutting-edge behavioural science frameworks and methodologies to understand and influence behaviour at scale. And I'm particularly interested in that at-scale conditional bit as well as we develop through this. The presentation Fenna is going to cover is addressing previous UK seatbelt campaigns which failed to reach South Asian communities, resulting in the message not received, which is the title of the presentation, and seatbelt non-wearing rates that are 5 times higher than the UK average. SOMO teamed up with Birmingham City Council and local communities to uncover the truth behind these startling figures. So today, Fenna is going to explore how they learned to understand and resolve this hidden health inequality. Fenna, over to you. I think Kate's driving your slides, isn't she? Is that right?
Thank you, David. I actually was thinking to do the same thing as Elizabeth, so I'm trying to share my screen at the moment. Bear with me.
Sorry, just for the audience, Fenna had a little trouble getting into the session beforehand, so I'm not quite sure where she is on the briefing.
Share.
Here we go. Right, Fenna, I can see your slides there.
That's amazing. I'll only do full screen. Yes, thank you.
Fantastic. Fenna, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, hi everyone. Thank you, David, and everyone who's organizing this event for the opportunity to tell you more about our project, Message Not Received. And as mentioned, this is a collaboration with Birmingham City Council, and it's funded through the Road Safety Trust. And before I tell you more about it, I'm very excited to do so. I will share a little bit about what we do at SOMO. So we are a behavioral science consultancy, and we have a very strong track record in projects related to highway transportation and road safety projects. And what we do is we use behavioral science to inform communications, interventions, and policy as well, that are more likely to actually change behavior because they're underpinned by those behavioral insights. And usually when we tell people about that we use behavioral science, we get one of two responses. So some people are quite impressed, maybe intrigued, and other people rather regard us with a degree of suspicion. So are we one of those companies that manipulate behavior without the knowledge or will of those involved? So to speak, is behavioral science maybe rather a modern day equivalent of the dark arts? Or is this really purely science? So let's find out what you think by the end of it. And to do that, we have to go back to the beginning of this project. So this project started in 2019 when Birmingham City Council approached us, because they looked at their casualty data and they saw that the road casualty figures in East Birmingham, so a specific area of Birmingham, were disproportionately high. And any of the interventions that had been effective elsewhere in the city had achieved very little impact. Nothing changed. And they had an initial hypothesis. They thought that young men speeding in high performance cars in these areas lay at the heart of this problem. Were they right, is the big question. Well, not quite. When we looked at the data, we saw that the targeting of drivers of prestige cars would have almost no impact, because the real reason that this area had higher deaths and injuries was explained by a very large number of passenger casualties. So 33% of all the casualties in this area were passenger casualties. And if we look at the graph on the right, we see that this was specifically peaking in the age between 16 and 24, so the younger population. So this rather suggested that the problem may lie elsewhere, namely in non-seatbelt use. But this was actually not such an obvious conclusion, because seatbelt rates and wearing of seatbelts is actually one of those problems or aspects in road safety that's often considered more or less solved. And that makes sense, because if you look at the national rates of seatbelt wearing, we see that only 8% of car occupants do not wear a seatbelt. But if we compare this to East Birmingham, this figure rises to 38%. So this is a staggering 5 times higher than the national average. And this was based on an observational study that we did of over 500 vehicles in 3 different points in this area of East Birmingham. And we overlaid this data with demographic data on ethnicity. And this is when we noticed that a majority of the passenger casualties were experienced by people of South Asian origin. So now we actually knew the what, the where, the when, the how, and the who. But without understanding, and this is from our behavioral science perspective, we feel we are limited in our ability to design an effective solution. And it was a difficult question, because if you look at decades of high-profile, well-regarded seatbelt campaigns, they had succeeded in achieving one of the highest wearing rates in the world, right? 8% of non-wearing, 92% of people do wear their seatbelt in the UK. So what had gone wrong? Why did that not work for this area in Birmingham? So we looked a little closer. We looked at the prior seatbelt campaigns, and we saw 2 important things. The first thing is that what they all shared in common is that they made use of emotion. So they used emotion to influence the viewer's behavior. And this is pretty standard practice because we know from research that emotion has a strong relationship with, for example, enhanced attention, more engagement, more intention, higher intention to perform the behavior, and even a higher recall of the message. But the slightly less obvious thing we noticed is that apart from one secondary character, which you see in the left bottom corner in the 2006 campaign, all of the people featured in these campaigns appear to be from British families living in middle-income suburbs. So, well, why does this matter, you might ask? Well, we know as well that people are more likely to emphasize and feel an emotional response when they identify with the campaign actor and its content. So the fact that these campaigns did not reflect the lives and the people of the South Asian community might have inadvertently resulted in what we call the message not received. And on the base of this, we developed a logic. We thought if we could increase the use of seatbelts in the first place, we would see a reduction in the passenger casualties. But more importantly, we knew that any intervention we would design needed to be targeted and tailored to the South Asian population. But that brought us to our next problem, because we realized very quickly, how can we effectively tailor when we have no idea what it means to be a South Asian teenager living in Birmingham? Because remember, it was mainly between the ages of 16 to 24. And another problem was that during this time that we were about to investigate this, we were still in a strict lockdown. So our usual approach of going out to the community, having interviews and doing an ethnography study would not work. So what we designed instead is a digital ethnography study. So over 8 weeks, 20 young people from the South Asian community in East Birmingham shared their lives with us. So they shared with us what they wear, what cars they drive, what they find important in life, where they drive to, who are with them in the car, how they feel about road safety, and much, much more. And we did this on a platform that is designed by Recollective. Maybe some of you have heard of it. That is specifically designed for this type of activity. And this is a short video, so I hope it works. There is no sound. So let's see if I can show you a little bit what this looked like. I think it's playing. So what we see here is the front page. So this is where they would enter. They would read about, okay, what's the purpose of these activities? What are ongoing discussions at the moment? Who has been online, etc. But what was most important to this platform is the activities, the tasks that you see here. So over a period of time, they got multiple different tasks and activities that would help us to gain information about them, about the people that were part of this program. And you see here, for example, an example of where they ranked different kind of car drills, what they would do when they get in the car, for example, what is the order of things that they would do, just to learn more about how they behave when they are driving. For example, they showed us what they liked about certain campaigns, what they disliked about campaigns, etc., and much more. So now you have hopefully an impression of what this looked like. And what we learned from this, one of the things is that we asked them about risk perceptions, because we all know probably that risk perceptions are very critical determinant in health behavior, so to engage in protective behavior. If you perceive there to be a risk and you feel like you know what you can do about it, you're more likely to engage in self-protective behavior. But we saw now that they ranked not wearing a seatbelt very low. So if you look here, they ranked at 7th from all of other kinds of risks in road safety. So this is what gave us input, or the information that we felt it would not be as effective if we would focus purely on the risk that comes along with not wearing your seatbelts. But what we did arrive from this, a very powerful insight after reviewing all of their inputs, is that all of the young people were highly susceptible to something known as an anticipated regret. So this is a feeling experienced in the present of regret we may feel in the future about decisions we're currently considering making. So what do we mean by that? Well, for example, if we look at this example, here are some of the concepts that they came up with, the young people that were part of this digital ethnography study. And that is where you see a young bride who never made it to her wedding. So the feeling of regret, you might miss out on your wedding day because you didn't wear your seatbelt. And with their input and further developing this together with the young people, we came to two final assets, and that are those. So the Ahmed one on the left focus on an educational loss, so never making it to your graduation. And the one on the right is a further development of the wedding theme. We see an artifact that is often associated with South Asian weddings. And we used their feedback because we wanted it to feel authentic and as accurately portrayed from their view of the world. But we of course wanted to test these. Are these actually effective? And to do so we needed to compare it to something. So we compared it to the most recent national campaign, a recent regional campaign, and an information-only campaign that we designed, which purely consisted of facts, factual information, but no other behavioral strategies or behavioral insights. And what the study looked like was the following. We did a randomized survey completed by 400 Birmingham residents between the ages of 16 and 22. 185 of them identified as South Asian and 215 identified as from another ethnic group. Each respondent was shown only one of the 5 possible campaigns, and we measured a variety of things. We wanted especially to know the response to the campaign in terms of their intention to wear a seatbelt after viewing the campaign, what they thought the intention of their peers would be if they would see the campaign, their emotional response to the campaign, and how likely they were to share the campaign with others. So what was the outcome of this? We saw that the tailored campaigns, so the 2 assets of Ahmed and Aisha that we developed together with the young Birmingham people, the young South Asian people from Birmingham, performed significantly better than the comparator campaigns. So the national campaign, the regional campaign, and the information-only campaign on all of the measures. This shows that the insights we uncovered were relevant to the experience of being a young person more generally, because these results were not yet split between the young people who identified as from a South Asian origin or from another ethnicity. So here we see that in general, the tailored campaign worked better, that where we used anticipated regret. When we then split it to look at especially the response from the South Asian young people, we saw a 35% increase in the number of emotions generated from viewing the tailored campaign. And that makes sense because people who are more likely to emphasize and feel an emotional response when they identify with the campaign actor and its content. So this really showed us that tailoring had worked. Wow. What's next? This proof of concept was achieved in Birmingham and it will now be developed into a full campaign, which we are really excited about. And this will be part funded by the Transport for West Midlands. So we really hope we can continue to evaluate the impact of such tailored campaigns. Secondary objectives that we have is to consider how the approach might be useful in relation to other road safety challenges. And with the approach, we mainly focus and mean the co-design aspect of this element. So bring in the people who you're designing for and have them have input on your designs and interventions to make sure that it's best tailored to them. So we also see a significance for the wider community because we see how this approach can be highly transferable to a wide range of behavioral opportunities like modal shift, climate agenda, road safety. All of them could make use of this co-design approach and digital ethnography. But now, at the very end, returning to the big question that I started this with, is this magic, the dark arts, or is it science? Well, we personally feel it's maybe a little bit of both. And that's because if you look at arts and magic, you use lateral thinking. And sometimes those behavioral insights can feel a little bit like magic because of the impact that they can have, such as anticipated regret, heightening the emotions, and the collaboration and creativity that you need for arts and magic. Or is it science? Well, we feel as well, because we use a diagnostic approach. We found a different problem than we initially thought was going on. We developed a hypothesis, we tested it, we deepened the insight as well, and we embedded these new insights into prototypes and tested those against them. So like I said, we feel it's a little bit of both. I'm curious what you all think. But to end this, and because we feel like it fits so well with this co-design approach, we would like to show you a short video from where we interviewed 2 young people who were participating in the study as young co-designers from the South Asian origin. So I will show you. I hope the sound is working, so please notify me if it's not.
I'm not sure I can hear that, Fenna.
Okay. I don't know if I can change anything in the settings. I did send the video.
Fenna, I can share the video if you'd like.
That would be amazing. I think it would be a great addition to end this. Yeah. I think I just sharing. Stop sharing. Yeah. Apologies.
The communities are really close bonded, everyone knows each other, so it's a really busy area. When you're there, you're at home and everything is around you. I feel proud that I was involved in this campaign, but now I know that change can actually happen.
I feel pride because, again, the whole reason I joined the project was to cause an impact, and I'm glad that we have actually made an impact.
Well, I think it's an astonishing statistic, and I think it's really important that you've discovered that because it shows that, that we need to take some action.
Whenever we would go in the car, we wouldn't think to put on our seatbelt straight away. It would always be something that we think about halfway through the journey, or sometimes not even in the journey.
It's been a long-standing thing within the South Asian community, and it needs to change. And it hurts me a lot, the fact that these issues are happening. And I think representation is important, because I feel like people not from the South Asian community, they wouldn't really understand the issue.
I think it's important because I'm a young person and obviously a South Asian, and I live within these communities. Therefore, I have an insight of what happens in the community and the people around me and the problems that happen in this area.
This is a co-design project. It seems to me really important, because if we want to try and change the behaviour of young people, then we need to work with the young people and actually start from their ideas.
Working with Solmo was great because the project was really linear, and it was kind of like step by step. And then once everyone got talking, got a bit more comfortable, then a lot of people started speaking out and speaking on the project itself, and you can see by the results that it was clearly a good project.
I would definitely influence people to become a co-designer because it's really fun, it lets you be creative, and you get to say your own ideas and voice what you're thinking.
We've had road safety strategies for decades, and we now need something different. I think we need to actually up the ante and say that we cannot tolerate any more deaths on the road.
Hopefully it might minimise the death or two in the future, and if it does that, then we've done our job.
Yes, thank you for showing the video, and that was also the end of the presentation. So thank you all for your attention, and welcome any questions you might have.
Oof, fantastic! I was particularly blown away by the comment in the Instagram post in the mock-up where the girl on the right was taking a selfie in the wedding car. That was a really punchy comment. Wow, shouldn't that. Okay, Fenna, there's been quite a few comments in the chat, but I think what we'll do is we'll go to Fiona in a second and then come back to yours in a moment. I think I've got one for you in terms of, again, applicability for practitioners. Can they just pick up some of these tools and self-start and those sorts of things, particularly the online platform as well, or is there some sort of guided service from yourself and others as well? But again, we'll come back to that at the end if that's okay. But absolutely fantastic presentation, and I'm really blown away by that. Okay, right. So just while Fenna's presentation is closing down, we will move over to Fiona.
Hello, thank you very much.
So I'll give you the introduction, Fiona. So this is Professor Fiona Thylan, and apologies before, I couldn't read my comments before, so I got a bit stuck. We work with Fiona. Fiona is from Leeds Beckett University, where she's the Professor of Sustainable Behaviour. Fiona's research focuses on behaviour change to create sustainable communities. This involves how they behave on the roads, for example, driving safely and considerately. I'm not going to go into the detail. Fiona can talk about this, but we're really proud of this piece of work that we've been working with Fiona for the last couple of years. And I'm really pleased that we can present it to this forum. So Fiona, over to you, and I will stop talking now.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And Kate, you have control of my slides, I think. So yeah, as Dave said, it was a project that has been running for a couple of years now, and it's all about trying to make children safer on the roads. So next slide, please. So why child pedestrian training? I mean, I remember being at school, albeit a very long time ago, and pedestrian road safety training was just part of what happened at school. But that's not the case anymore. Despite road accidents being one of the leading causes of accidental death for children, RoSPA's own work has found that around half don't actually receive any pedestrian safety training at all while they're at school. So what, you might think, the kids pick this up surely from their parents. It's the family's responsibility to show children how to walk safely on the roads. But actually, that's not true either. Well, maybe it is their responsibility, but it certainly isn't something that always happens. What we found from the earliest parts of this research is that not only do children not learn road safety skills from their parents, but often their parents are modelling very unsafe behaviours. So, for instance, using a mobile phone while they're crossing, not crossing at pedestrian crossing sites, but just wandering across the road and really not looking where they're going at all. So it's even worse than they're not getting any training. They're being shown very unsafe behaviours. So RoSPA decided to do something about this, and they've developed and piloted a new child pedestrian training scheme, which we've been involved in evaluating. So the first year of the project was looking at what this should actually contain. So it's based on all sorts of work looking at what's about at the moment, what do teachers and road safety officers believe is important, and piloting a few earlier versions and looking as well, do we really need an on-road element? Is that important? So the part of the project I'm going to talk to you about is once that pilot resource has been developed, let's evaluate it. So Kate, next slide, please. So what is the pilot resource? Well, it comprises a slide deck, so a presentation that's delivered in an assembly that's having a look at some of the factors that might influence behaviour, looking at how children use the road, and starting to touch upon some safe skills. That's the core of it. Then also there's guidance for teachers that explains how to use the resource. And there's guidance for parents as well to give them some tips for what's going to be happening in their children's pedestrian safety training, and also letting them know about some of the safe skills they'll be learning. There's also some instructions for the teachers and for professionals who might be delivering this for how to run the classroom activities and also how to run the roadside skills activity as well. Then we've got a plenary workshop, and then finally there's a certificate for children too, that they have completed the training. So that's the resource. It did involve a lot of co-design work with children, which I'm not going to talk about, but it is developed very much with children at the core. And next slide, please. So what about our research design? Well, we used a cluster randomized control trial, which I think, as Liz said, is a very rigorous experimental design. We recruited 6 pairs of schools, so that's 12 schools in total, and each pair was demographically matched. So broadly similar area in terms of urban versus rural, and socio-demographic status, index of multiple deprivation, number of children at the school, class sizes, and so on. So we've got our 6 pairs of schools, and Within each pair, one was randomised to the intervention group and one to the control group. Now, children in the intervention group received the road safety training. Those in the control group didn't. Now, that might seem unfair, and we thought so too. So every school in the control group, they were offered the training if they wished to take it up after the research data collection was completed, and they all were very interested in taking up that offer. So what about our measures? Questionnaire based primarily, so children completed a road safety knowledge questionnaire. So what we're measuring is their knowledge of road safety skills. They completed that a month before the training and a month afterwards. Now, we had 603 children in total completing questionnaires, but this was taking place during COVID as well. So not all of them were present at school for both the pre-intervention and the post-intervention questionnaire. So we had 478 children who completed their questionnaire both before and after the training. We didn't just look at road safety knowledge, we also look at how much of this did children actually understand? Do they just rote learn how to cross the road, what to look for, or do they really understand why they're looking for these things? So to explore that, we used cognitive walks with 23 children. And in cognitive walks, what we do is we go through a road environment and we get children talking about what are they looking at and why, what are they noticing, what do they think they should be doing, how are they crossing the road, but also why are they crossing that road in that way. So it's really to dig more deeply into not only what do they know, but what do they understand, and can they apply their knowledge in new environments. Now, typically when we do this, we do it actually on the roadside with children. But of course, this was COVID times, so we had to develop a way of doing this that didn't actually involve going into schools. So we created a video version of this. Now, this can be delivered either face-to-face or online if need be. Thankfully, we're able to do it all face-to-face, but that was a really good backup to have. We also wanted to know about the perceptions of the teachers in the schools and also the road safety professional who delivered the training. So we conducted interviews with all of those as well, really to explore their perceptions of the training resource, how the children responded to that, and has that really made any difference to their children's roadside skills? Okay, next slide please, Kate. So the questionnaire itself. Okay, so it's a questionnaire that has been around for a little amount of time. It is designed specifically for children in this age group. We actually developed it ourselves, but about, blimey, it must be about 10 years ago now, on a project we were working with Staffordshire, when we identified there wasn't really a UK-focused road safety questionnaire for children of this age. So back then we did all the typical measures of the questionnaire, and it's got good internal consistency, we got a good range of responses and so on. So questionnaire we got confidence in. Children completed it in school under supervision of the teacher, and they did it online. It comprises 16 questions, scores range from 0 to 20, and it covers knowledge about crossing the road, about reflective clothing, about using different types of crossings and so on. All the content included in the pedestrian training resource. Okay, next slide please, Kate, and we'll have a look at some of the results. So here is just a selection of the findings. So we've got the questionnaire topic on the left-hand side, so things like wearing reflective clothes at night. And then the next two columns, these are the percentage of the children who got this correct at T1, so before the training, and T2 after the training. And what I'm showing you here is just the results from those children who completed the training, so just the children in the intervention group. So we can see that some of the questions, children are already scoring highly. So knowledge about the importance of stop, look and listen before crossing. That increased a bit, but it was already very high. Started off at 88% and increased to 93%. Where to stand when crossing between parked cars, for instance, towards the bottom of that table, that is much lower. Only 20% of children scored that correctly before the training, and then increased a little bit up to 32% after the training. Likewise, where to look when crossing a junction, quite low, 44% before the training, increased up to 64% afterwards. So it does look like we are seeing some good increases. But of course, we need to compare the results from children who completed the training with those who didn't have the training, so those in our control group. So Kate, next slide, and let's have a look at those results. So what we've got here are two different blocks of results. So on the left-hand side, we see children in the intervention group. The green bars are before the training and the red bars after the training. And we can see an increase. This is the scores from the questionnaire. So it goes up from an average of 10.5 up to 12.2. So we are seeing an increase there. But what we're really interested in is saying, is this increase larger than the increase we see in the control group, which also increases from an average of 9 up to 10.1. So we're seeing an increase over time, and the statistics we do on that clearly shows that in that 2-month period, questionnaire scores did increase. But the key is, did they increase more in the intervention group? And they do. The statistical test we used showed not only an effect of time, but also an interaction between time and schools, indicating that children who were in the intervention schools had a larger increase in their road safety knowledge scores than those in the control schools, indicating that the training does increase road safety knowledge. Okay, next slide, please, Kate. What about how children feel when they're crossing the road without an adult? Because this is very important as well. So if children are frightened, scared about using the road as a pedestrian, about crossing the road, they're less likely to do it, and they're less likely to become confident, independent and safe pedestrians. So what we can see here is before and after percentages of children who said they felt this way when they're crossing the road. So we can see a big increase in the percentage who said that they feel careful, who feel happy, small increase in those who feel safe, but a decrease in those who said that they feel scared, unsafe and worried. So we're seeing the pedestrian road safety training resource is having a very positive effect on how children feel when they're crossing the road independently as well. Okay, next slide. So what about the cognitive walks? As I've said, it's not enough just to know, is knowledge increasing? We're also really interested in exploring understanding. Do children understand why they're doing this, or are they just rote learning things? Can they apply their knowledge in new situations? Or is it that they've just learnt to cross the road in that particular road environment in which the training took place? And what we found through the cognitive walks is that children could apply their knowledge and understanding about things like whereabouts they should be walking on the pavement, for instance, so they're not right close to the road. Selecting a safe place to cross the road, even though it's a road that they've never seen before, they were able to figure out where is a good place to cross that road. And each of these we found a couple of children typically who didn't understand this, but nearly all of them, say usually 21, 22, were able to identify where would be good to cross the road and understand why as well, to be able to explain their reasoning. They knew where to look when they're crossing the road, and also a key skill, how to cross between parked cars as well. So actually, when we were looking at creating the video cognitive walk, I was using my local area for the video, and it was incredibly difficult to find a place where you could cross that wasn't between parked cars. So this is a really useful set of skills and understanding for children to have. Crossing a junction, more difficult. Most, but not all of them, understood where you should look. So for instance, the importance of looking behind you as well. nearly all understood why it's important to wear reflective clothes in the dark, and nearly everybody as to why they should not use a phone when crossing the road. And in fact, most of them thought it's not safe to use a phone when you're walking along at all, let alone crossing at the road. So really positive results from the cognitive walks. Okay, next slide. And what about the interviews? So these are interviews with teachers in the classes that had the road safety pedestrian training. So we identified several themes from these interviews. First one was that teachers believe that this is a really important and a valuable resource. They again talked about how in many cases, this is the first pedestrian training that children had ever received. And when children were completing their road safety knowledge questionnaire before the training, teachers talked about being really surprised actually how little children knew about road safety. They kind of knew in many cases that the children weren't really picking up many road safety skills from their parents, but they were quite shocked how little they knew. They again reinforced our earlier finding that parents often model very poor, very unsafe pedestrian behaviour. And as we heard right at the beginning from David, that this is where children are learning what's normal, what's usual, what's expected of them. And if that is you walk along not using a crossing, not looking where you're going, chatting on your mobile phone, then these are very unsafe skills for children to be developing. And it is very important that they have proper training to highlight what is safe and considerate and responsible ways of using the road. Teachers also highlighted how there's a huge variation in how much experience children have of using the road. They talked about some kids, they're just driven everywhere. They're not independent road users, and they probably won't be for some time. Whereas teachers, particularly in some schools, were talking about how the children are already independent road users. They're already able to leave their home and wander around unaccompanied on the estates where they live. So again, particularly for them, it's really, really important to have this training. And what the teachers also talked about was how much the children had learned, how much they'd remembered from it, and how much they'd carried on talking about their training for some time after it took place. So, finding one, it's an important and valuable resource. Kate, next slide, please. Next finding from our interviews was how much the teachers believed that the roadside element was essential. Now, in one school, this was quite a condensed project. The time between the resource being developed and being delivered in schools was really quite short. So for one of the schools, they didn't have enough notice of this is what the resource includes in order to go through all the risk assessment processes. So for them, the roadside skills were developed in the playground, which the teacher thought was useful, but not as useful as doing it on the roadside would be. All our teachers talked about how valuable it is that children are actually out there on the road doing things, and how they learn so much more by doing and practicing than getting feedback than they would do in a classroom. So this really supports what we found right at the beginning of this research when we were looking at what could a resource include. And teachers also thought if children are doing this on the roadside, they're practicing it, they're much more likely to put these skills into practice than if they're learning things from a PowerPoint in the classroom. Okay, next slide. What also became clear from our interviews was that the resource itself, the teachers believed it was too content heavy. Now, this was right the way through, really. So the assembly, they talked about it being too long, frankly, to hold children's attention. There was a lot of really useful resources in there, but too much content to really cover in the allotted time. This was reinforced by the road safety professional who delivered the training as well. Too much content. Too many activities as well. So the teachers did appreciate the fact there was a choice of activities that they could run in the classroom, but there wasn't really enough time to go through them all. So what a few of them did was to run a few classroom activities in that morning or afternoon session that the intervention was being run, and they delivered the remainder as follow-up activities over the following days and weeks. Teachers also highlighted that the guide for parents was also very text heavy, and they thought their parents would be unlikely to read it all, and they wouldn't be happy in many cases sending it out. So lots of learning about the content of the resource. So the skills that it teaches are good and they are effective. We've seen in increasing road safety knowledge, but the design and the content and the amount of content could be tailored a little bit. Okay, next slide. And the importance of an external trainer. Now, so this is from the teacher interviews in particular. They really appreciated the way that the road safety professional was able to tailor the content of the slides, the assembly, to their specific school. So for instance, including photos of their school, of the roads around it, tailoring it to the type of traffic children are likely to encounter. So that was good, and you could argue that the teachers are best positioned to be able to do that tailoring. But the teachers did highlight the importance of an external person coming into the school to deliver this content. They talked about how it made it much more exciting. It seemed much more important that the school had brought in an external person. And the road safety professional had much more credibility than if it had been the teachers delivering it. So even though the resource was designed so that it could be delivered by a professional or the teachers themselves, certainly the teachers who took part in the interviews were very keen that they could continue working with a road safety professional. However, the road safety professional himself talked about how it actually can be quite difficult to access sufficient time. Schools are already very time pressured when it comes to fitting everything into the school year. So it can be difficult for an external person to approach the school and suggest that an entire morning or an afternoon is taken up by road safety training. Okay, next slide. So in conclusion then, we know that many children of this age 8 to 9, they lack basic road safety knowledge, especially crossing between parked cars and crossing at junctions. And we know from the research that the RoSPA road safety resource does increase children's road safety knowledge, but not only knowledge, it also gives them understanding that they can apply in new road situations. And the research that we've done has highlighted many ways that the resource could be improved, for instance, by reducing content, increasing the duration of the session, and shortening the guides for both teachers and parents. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Fiona, that was absolutely fantastic. There's been a number of questions coming through. And I'm going to ask all the panelists to switch on their cameras and we'll go to that. Fiona, we'll stay with you first. There was a question about the cognitive walk and the application to a positive feel for the road safety environment. So where the children applied the skills and knowledge that they'd been through. And I'm just going to bring that up just to make sure that I'm reading this right. But effectively, it was saying, did this correlate or does it indicate any more increased risk? So was there any unwanted behaviours or other effects? I think that's how I've read that, interpreted that.
So no, there was no evidence at all from the cognitive walks. And it's a really good question, actually, because one question we should always be asking with interventions, does it include any adverse effects that we perhaps hadn't anticipated? But no, there was no evidence at all that children were using their I've been trained and therefore it's safe for me to cross the road without looking, for instance, or I can use my mobile when I'm crossing the road because I've been trained. So really good question, and thankfully we didn't find any evidence from the cognitive walks that could be going on.
Okay, brilliant. And just a plug from that, the Fiona's review and the report is available on the RoSPA website, which I'll ask Becky to drop the link in here for others to see that. And again, for me, the importance of working with an absolute expert in that, even though we have some very knowledgeable and trained staff in the space, was really, really valuable. Being able to go and test and have that feedback really gave us confidence to push through some of those aspects there. Okay, right. Fenna, there's a couple of questions for yourself. So I'm going to go back to Fenna next, if that's okay. There was two questions. First one was just unpicking in a little bit more detail the seatbelts and passengers question. Why? What led you to that causative insight piece there? So there was that one there. And then secondly, do you feel like this is this scenario is applicable elsewhere in other communities as well? So these two questions there for yourself, and you can take either or I'll say no to both of you if you don't want to answer them.
First one, were you referring to the one in the chat?
Sorry,
yes. Yeah. So why we re-diagnose the problem? I think that's a great question. I think, well, when we started talking to Birmingham City Council, they told us right about the initial hypothesis that maybe it were young men in high performance cars driving the street. And that assumption was mainly based on recent events. So it was covered in the newspaper, and also residents of the area, complained about, finding it annoying even. But our approach, that what we use with behavioral science, is we follow a systematic approach to design interventions to hopefully ensure more effective solutions and outcomes. And part of that is always to check these assumptions. And we did. We looked at the data from Stats 19. And from that data, we could not confirm the initial hypothesis from Birmingham City Council, and it rather painted a different picture. And then even overlaying it with different kind of data sets, for example, demographic data sets, we saw another picture. So that's why we came to the re-diagnosis, and following our approach is basically the answer to that. Yeah.
Okay. And then the wider applicability. So do we see opportunities or similar challenges in other communities?
In other communities, we think that's a very interesting question, because we actually looked, once again, when we looked at the demographic data, we compared it to other areas of Birmingham, but also other areas of the UK. And for example, looked at areas where it was predominantly a white population, but also areas where it was more of a mixed demographic. And none of the areas showed as high numbers in passenger casualties as in the areas where predominantly the South Asian population was living. So that led us to believe that it was really specifically should be targeted at this population when we look at seatbelt use. But we can imagine, because it was hidden at first, this problem, that if we would do similar research and overlaying different kind of data sets, looking at demographic data as well, that we might find other problems that might be the case for different kind of communities. So that might still definitely be just the tip of the iceberg that we found there. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. There's a question coming via email to all practitioners, which I'm going to give you a minute at the end just to say, but to all the panelists, sorry. But if you had one top tip or one golden piece of advice for a practitioner, in particular for a practitioner, what would it be? If that's okay. And sorry to put you on the spot there on that one. So I'm going to give you all a couple of minutes to think about that one, or we'll come back to that one in a minute. Okay, whilst we're thinking about that question there, David, there's a couple of questions for yourself. I'm assuming you've had a chance to have a look at them, but I'm going to read part of them, or I'm going to pro-say them. So there's one from John, who he's mentioned it. John's a trustee of the London Road Safety Council. He's mentioned about the impact of police resources in the Met, and really his question is, what can we do to best enforce speed limits, particularly in the designated 20-mile-an-hour zones, and what could DFT and legislation do to enable that? So within the mix. So this links back to your wider framework question.
Yeah.
That's one there.
Okay, so if we take it back to the start, it's a matter for local police and crime commissioners, and in John's case, it'd be the Mayor of London, and chief officers, to actually how they deploy their policing resources that they have, and sorting out the priorities and where they should be deployed. So very much it is a local decision that DFT cannot get involved in. And in fact, a lot of the case law is absolute. The police have responsibility for operational deployment and operational decisions. In respect to the speed limits, the current guidance is it's the local authorities actually have the power to set the appropriate speed limits for their local road. So the answer, John, is very much one for London councils and the mayor in that respect, and not one for the DFT, because the guidance is quite clear. It's local powers and local decisions. And do you want me to take the next one, David, on section 19? Yeah, I mean, shorthand for that is blue light emergency service driving. And it's always very difficult in terms of communication. The Department of Transport is working very, very closely with all the relevant organisations that have an interest in that. And hopefully in the not too distant future, we are going to be able to publish a consultation on the guidelines that we are looking to bring in, just to ensure that those members of the emergency services and also other response services who actually use blue lights and other exemptions are trained to the highest possible standards. So just watch this space. Whoever asked that, we're going to get something out as soon as we can do, and there will be a public consultation on that.
Okay, brilliant.
And do you want something else from me? The answer to the $65 million question?
Yes, please, go on.
I think the one key thing for me really is listen, never be afraid to ask the experts, because there's always somebody out there who knows much better than you.
Wise counsel as ever. Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to come back to Fiona quickly. Tiago has asked an absolutely fantastic question that I wanted to ask myself, so thank you for that. He says, very interesting presentation. Do you have plans to expand this project to more schools or include more road safety subjects? So Fiona, what would you see as next? What would you see ideally as next within that project from your perspective?
Oh, well, I was going to throw that one back to you, Dave. But yes, it would be really good to expand it to different schools, a wider range of schools, make those changes to the resource that we identified in the evaluation would improve it. But yeah, what are your plans for it?
So again, I think the short answer is we're very interested in the adverse effects of the parental behaviours as well, because again, one of the really standout things for me is we can design an optimised intervention, which obviously we can learn a lot from that feedback, but also there was some really interesting comments about the child can walk out of the classroom, see really bad behaviours and have a lot of that learning wiped out. So we were quite interested in that whole effect around the child as well. So that I think will be an area that we want to explore before we start to look at anything like scaling or partnership or anything there really. That's my effect. I'm also conscious that Becky is our specialist in the room as well, so she may have some other strong views than myself there. Okay. I think we're going. There's lots of to and fro's on speed limits. I'm going to be frank. I'm not going to go into a lot of them because of the education thematic of today's questions. But we will address them, and we will get some written answers or some routes to that. I'm going to go to Elizabeth for your top tip or your one thing that you would say, if that's okay.
Oh, great! I'm glad you came to me first, because I'm sure there'll be some similarity in what we all say, but. Yeah, just reflecting on that question, I think in road safety we need to be more like the rest of the public health sphere, and that kind of, I think, is a great model to kind of go with. And in public health, you would have the skills and experience and requisite kind of background to be able to go and deliver anything. And at the moment, road safety, we're an unregulated sector, essentially. So that being said, and that's not practitioners' fault, that's just the kind of the world that we live in. And I think there's big moves to try and change that over the next few years. But I suppose for practitioners, make sure you're informed about what you're going to do. The kind of, we'll do no harm. I don't think we can carry on doing that. You need to make sure what you're delivering is not going to do harm. And so either make sure you're informed, or otherwise try and buy in some expertise to assist you. I mean, you've just had Fiona and Fenna speak to you, and they're great examples of consultancies. There's many more out there. As you say, there's many different types, but that can support you in the work you do, and then hopefully take some of that work and put it into other sectors as well. So yeah, call on others. I think it's pretty similar to what David said. Make sure you're getting the right skills and expertise that you need.
Okay, and Fenna, the one top tip, the one closing thought you would leave with for practitioners?
Practitioners, yeah, definitely. I think what's mostly important from, hopefully became clear from our presentation, is to really understand your target audience. So to step into their shoes and look at the world from their perspective, learn why they behave the way they do. And there are different techniques and tools that you can use to get there, to fully understand them. One of them we like to advise, which is in that sense easy, is building personas. It's used a lot in user research. And we actually are also doing workshops on this next week at the Road Safety conference. So if anyone is coming there, please join our workshop, and I'm happy to tell you more about building personas and understanding the target audience to ensure you can tailor to your audience. Yeah.
Okay. And I think what we'll do as well is we'll drop a link into the RSGB conference next week. I mean, to be frank, if anybody's not booked and not thinking as and ahhing about going, we are taking as many of our staff as we can get there, because again, it's a brilliant time out for learning and actually networking as well. I said that with a virtual conference. Right, Fiona, I'm coming back to you. So you've got the tough slot on answering this question. So no pressure.
Oh, okay. Well, I am going to shamelessly steal from things that Fenna and Liz said earlier on. So Fenna's understand your audience, really important, as in test your assumptions, don't go with your assumptions. And once you've got that, what Liz noted earlier on is really important. Don't try and do everything. Really try and tailor your intervention. Be very clear about what exactly it is you're trying to do. And then it's much easier to measure it.
Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. I think we are a couple of minutes to 3 o'clock, so I'm going to bring the event to a close. I feel like I've learned an absolute ton. I've had some really impactful sessions. Fenna was really the comments on the Instagram post really took me aback, and then actually reflect some of the conversations I've had with parents in the past. Comment for the audience really is that we, as a collective in the UK, with David's help and many of the people here, we are forming a group of Road Safety Education Forum. I think we'd love to hear more from this audience about what that means, what that agenda should be. We ourselves have just done a survey on actually what current practice is, and there are things that we would want to carry on. So we'd like to carry on this conversation, not necessarily in the conference format or either in the education format, but we would like to hear from you about what you would like to see, what you would like to hear, and what next. That would be really helpful for us in terms of steering what the next 18 months, what the next 2 years look like within the new road safety strategic framework, which I'm not really going to lobby, but I'm definitely going to lobby for a slicker name for the new framework, David, please. Thank you very much for today. The workshop, the notes, the presentations, everything you've heard today will be available and sent to you directly via email. Again, if you'd like to become involved in the Road Safety Education Forum, drop us a note and we'll make sure that David sees that. And thank you very much for your interaction and the questions and your attention. So without no further ado, I'm going to bring this event to a close and look forward to seeing many of you soon in face-to-face.